yesterday, while the Super Bowl was happening, Israel decided to, around the same time, decided to start bombing Rafah, which was coming up for, I guess, like a week. They had signaled that they were going to start bombing Rafah. Rafah is the southernmost point of the Gaza Strip, for those of you who do not know, and it is the area that is supposed to be like the last remaining safe space, because they originally forced the Palestinians to evacuate from northern Gaza, saying that there was going to be a military operation there, into southern Gaza. Then they started bombing different parts of southern Gaza all the way into Rafah, which is where the Rafah border crossing is with Egypt. It is literally the southernmost point of the Gaza Strip, where currently the estimates are that there are more than 1 million Palestinian civilians remaining. And this was a particularly bloody campaign, as far as I understand, that also coincided with the Shin Bet doing a special operation to rescue 2 hostages simultaneously. And the cost of that was more than 100 Palestinians that were killed ruthlessly as a simple distraction. So 50 of them specifically in the bombing campaign, but 100 total. And I wanted to get your thoughts on that, and where you fall on this. I mean, and update people as well on the issue.
Yeah, we're in an extraordinarily depressing, dire. I wish I could say unforeseeable, but I won't say that. But a depressing and dire kind of moment. What's happening in Rafah is especially troublesome right now. You've laid out a big part of it. Israel's campaign. Ultimately, if we begin from the premise that Israel's campaign has not been to wage war on Hamas, but to wage war on the Palestinian people, and to ultimately achieve the goal of depopulation, ethnic cleansing, etc., then this all tracks. It's kind of the only way this makes sense. Everything else will confuse you if you don't begin from the place of understanding that, a colony is going to colonize, right? And so the move from the south to the north, or from the north to the south, has not been without serious peril for Palestinians from the beginning. The whole argument was, oh, we're the most moral army in the world. We're the most principled army in the world. We give you notice. We do this. We do this. And what we have found is, in some ways, they've explicitly abandoned their strategies of things like roof knocking as a way of giving warnings. And they've said, like, look, after October 7th, we ain't warning you about anything, basically. And then there were the people.
Roof knocking in and of itself is already like a pretty ridiculous practice, but it was, in my opinion, done specifically to obviously market Israel's actions to the Western world as though they are the most moral army. And like What you're saying is like liberal Zionism is just gone as a concept at this point, post October 7th.
Right, and they've used October 7th as a pretext to say, look, we tried this liberal BS. Now we're going to just have to go, whole hog. And for those who don't know, the idea of roof knocking is to drop a kind of to drop a munition on a structure, a house, whatever, as a warning to say, hey, get out within X amount of time. The problem is X amount of time is not enough time, and oftentimes they don't even observe the rules that they say they're going to follow, which has been the challenge of the evacuations from the north to the central part of Gaza and from the center to the south, is that, you got 72 hours and then within a few hours, people are getting hit. Or you got 72 hours or 24 hours or whatever, take this road, and then you take that road and that road gets hit. And so the humanitarian corridors, the pathways to safety, the shelters, the hospitals, the masajid, everything that's supposed to be safe are not safe. And so against the backdrop of that, you see people now in Rafah. And so people are now in the southern part of the Gaza Strip, which again is very dense. You're talking about 25 miles long, 5 miles wide. And you got these people who are there ostensibly for shelter. And you have to understand, Rafah is supposed to have maybe 250,000 people, 200,000 people, and that's still dense. And now you're looking at over 1 million people there, 1.2 maybe million people there. And they're there ostensibly for safety. And now, because the Israeli state has decided that this is a Hamas breeding ground and it's littered with violence and terrorism, that now they're going to do ground invasions there. They're going to continue to strike there. And so they're now asking people to move north 20 kilometers, about 8 miles. Except now they have nowhere to go. They have no way of getting there. lots of children with no parents, lots of people with most people with no vehicles, 1.7 million at 2.2 with no house, no shelter. It's freezing cold at night. We could list all the things that make movement almost impossible, and then the very pathways that they're taking to safety or to ostensible safety are littered with violence. And so, and by every measurable index, any further violence, any further military invasion into Rafah will lead to a humanitarian disaster. That's according to independent bodies, human rights organizations, etc. And the Israeli government once again has said, look, we'd love not to do it. We really aren't into this whole genocide thing. However, Hamas, they're everywhere. They're leaving us with no choice. And so, as a result, what's happening in Rafah is kind of the culmination of the last, 4 or 5 months, which is a war not on Hamas, which by any measures would be a failure, but instead a war on the most vulnerable people of Palestinian society. And so, any response we have right now, as we see another mosque destroyed, as we see hospitals being sieged, as we see more innocent people dead, is we have to demand an immediate ceasefire in order to prevent something worse from happening.
Yeah. There are people in the chat saying that this wasn't actually a real hostage operation. The hostage operation was earlier, and that the Israeli government is simply claiming that it was a cover to provide cover to the hostage operation. So I want to issue. I want to make sure that you guys understand this. I should have said this is the Israeli military's reasoning, claiming that they were killing at least 67 people, according to the health ministry, so that they could provide military cover as Shin Bet rescued 2 hostages. Now the problem is, according to Haaretz, I don't know, chatters, if you have the Haaretz article saying that the 2 hostages were released on the 2nd of February, so that was actually 10 days prior. That would be pretty ridiculous if they were actually rescued 10 days prior and it wasn't a different operation that you guys are confusing with. However, as you all know, there's always a lot of post hoc rationalizations and post hoc evidence gathering, evidence in air quotes, whenever there's something going on that's specific. Israel always finds, CNN will write a report on 16 cemeteries that are desecrated. And then the next day, the IDF will be like, actually, here's a Hamas headquarters under a cemetery. That's why we had to destroy 16 cemeteries, right? And it's really interesting how that always happens. UNRWA, which has been a burden, a thorn on Benjamin Netanyahu and far right Israeli sides for the crimes of keeping Palestinians alive, hiring 13,000 Palestinians, being like a major lifeline for many Palestinians, because it's not just a UN-backed organization, but one that actually hires Palestinians directly and plays a big role in their civic life, right? With schools and whatnot. This is a organization that Israel has routinely criticized and wanted to abolish, eviscerate, destroy. And then after the ICJ decision, which also, of course, featured testimonials from UNRWA workers and whatnot, Israel very quickly offered what I would, I guess, in the most liberal way possible, describe as misinformation to claim that 12 out of the 13,000 UNRWA employees were actually collaborating. We're actually collaborating with Hamas on October 7th, and therefore this organization needs to be cut. This organization's funding needs to be cut, which, additional investigation found out that much of that information was also untrue, yet it doesn't fucking matter. And now they found another Hamas headquarters, like a base of operations directly under an UNRWA facility. That's what Israel found recently. So they do this all the time. There's always something that comes right after people criticize whatever specific thing Israel has done.
Yeah. Timing is always this timing is so absurd that you would think the rest of the world would notice, right? On the day of an ICJ decision, suddenly this UNRWA dossier gets revealed to the mass public that discredits the United Nations altogether. I mean, it's ridiculous stuff.
There's also another story. I don't know if you're familiar with this. The story of Hind Rajab, 6 years old.
Yeah.
Who was also executed.
Founded.
Yeah. And the way that the British media covered this story, I'm actually kind of surprised that this hasn't gotten more coverage overall. But this is a 6-year-old that was, I guess, found dead in Gaza days after phone calls for help. And the way this article utilizes neutrality as a weapon,
voice. Yes.
Yeah, I've never seen passive voice to this degree. Like I've talked about how the IDF not only ironically trains cops and vice versa, but that like the media, the mainstream press in the Western world basically writes about the IDF as though they are the police. Dealing with the people of color, and they utilize passive voice in an identical way. This is the most maxed out version of said passive voice. Here, I'll share my screen with you as well, so you can see what I'm looking at here. Do you want to elaborate a little bit on the story of Hind Rajab real quick?
It's a really disturbing tale for a few reasons. I mean, one obviously is the actual death itself, right? When this young woman was child was killed or was died in this car, the only one who survived from an attack is in and of itself problematic. I hear I'm starting to hear right-wing Israelis and other people say it was Palestinians who killed the family. I have seen no evidence of that. And we saw this girl. We have audio recordings of this girl actually making phone calls, trying to get help. And one of the challenges in this moment, we saw this with some of the journalists who were killed in the last month. Even when you look at the family of you see even when people are killed or not killed and they're looking for medical help, there's blockades, there's physical obstruction. It's impossible to get the kind of support that you need. And in this case, she lost her aunt, her uncle, she lost cousins. And once again, when you look at the overall Palestinian child population, tens of thousands of it are now parentless or guardianless because of the amount of people who have been killed in this. And so one of the things that we've all been outraged by in the last 24 hours, last 48 hours, of course, has been the way the headlines have been like a little girl found. In fact, here's one right here. I'm looking now at what you posted. A 6-year-old girl who went missing in Gaza City last month has been found dead, right?
Along with several of her relatives and 2 paramedics who tried to save her after they appeared to have come under fire from Israeli tanks. And even in that situation, you're burying the lead in the subtitle. I don't know how that's even possible. That you openly admit that it's
before they weren't even mentioning the Israeli tanks. It was just 6-year-old girl found dead in car.
Yeah. Oh yeah. The title is Hind Rajab 6 found dead in Gaza days after phone calls for help. As though this was an earthquake or something.
Right. Right.
And she made phone calls and not that this was a car that was attacked by Israeli tanks, and then the Palestinian Red Crescent made efforts with an ambulance on the evening of January 29th to find Hind Rajab after phone calls that she made because they believe that she was trapped in the vehicle in Gaza City with 6 dead family members, and the A group said that they had been killed by Israeli fire deliberately. And the Red Crescent statement on Saturday also accused the Israeli forces of bombing the ambulance as it arrived just meters away from the vehicle containing the trapped child and killing 2 rescuers inside. It said this happened despite prior coordination between the Red Crescent and the Israeli military. We know that the Israeli military also has snipers trained on people that they wound deliberately and then shoot civilians that try to recover the wounded and try to save the wounded. They openly open fire on civilians that are trying to help out other civilians in any part of Gaza.
That is a fact. And again, these aren't outliers. This is the norm at this point. Help is cut off. Innocent people are being killed in houses, in cars, in shelters, in hospitals. And, Amnesty International just today, in fact, talked about the results of several investigations of homes that have been bombed and cars similarly that have been shot. And they say that there's they haven't found any legitimate military operation, no legitimate combatant, no legitimate target to justify this type of violence.
Yeah. and there rarely ever is, but I'm saying, like, be on the lookout for post-mortem slander for how 6-year-old Palestinian girls are also somehow Hamas.
Yeah, she was part of a Girl Scout troop that was connected to Hamas,
Yeah,
or the car
itself
was disguised as Hamas. So, I mean, like, at this point, it's so absurd, and part of what they also do, and we saw this in the States, with the civil injunctions against gangs, was they had these initiatives where they would, put people on gang lists and watch lists if you had a gang affiliation or a gang connection. But I mean, what does it mean to be connected to a gang if you live in South Central Los Angeles, right? I mean, everybody's 1 degree of separation from somebody, And similarly, in an area that's dense, where Hamas is the democratically elected ruling body, they control various dimensions of the state.
Yeah.
And they're on the ground. It's damn near impossible to have a job, to be employed, to live somewhere, to be a human being and not be 1 or 2 degrees of separation directly from the people that the state are trying to kill, or that the Israeli state is trying to kill. And so you can make a case that anybody has a Hamas affiliation. Anybody's loosely connected to Hamas. And so when they kill our journalists, they can say, oh, well, they were part of Hamas. And you find out they just worked at the radio station.
Yeah.
And so similarly, they'll say, well, that car got hit. The girl, at best, they'll say, well, Hind was, we didn't want to hit the 6-year-old girl, but everybody else in that car could get it. And because they had Hamas connections, and that becomes the pretext for all sorts of indiscriminate violence.
Yeah, it's completely unacceptable. It's ethnic cleansing through and through. And it is a damn shame that the Western world, the Western leadership, specifically the United States of America, is not only not doing anything about this, but also offering full support, full-throated support, as a matter of fact, like cutting off UNRWA funding when America is the largest funder of UNRWA. A day after the ICJ court decision was, in my opinion, a very deliberate, very straightforward statement that they were making about how we do not give a fuck about the international rule-based order unless we are the ones who are writing the rules and we are the ones making the orders, which is something that I truly do think America believes. It's just such a clear demonstration of that reality, however. So yeah, this is pretty awful. But like I said also earlier, here it is. As far as the bombing campaign in Rafah, the IDF and Shin Bet have been working, according to Barak Ravid, the IDF and Shin Bet have been working on the rescue operation for several weeks based on intelligence. The operational opportunity came today. The Israeli Air Force conducted heavy airstrikes in Rafah as a diversion to allow the extraction of the 2 hostages, which, once again, ridiculous to claim that, like, in order to save, quote unquote, 2 hostages, you had to kill 60 people, like 60 civilian Palestinians, men, women, children, elderly, specifically to do that. And it's gross. I don't think it even works, but I don't think they even care at this point because nobody gives a shit. It's seemingly like the people that care obviously are protesting, but those in positions of power do not care. And
October 7th, and they never cared, but October 7th destroys the pretext, right? So now you can just say what happened to us was so awful that anything that happens in retaliation is appropriate. I mean, I've been told that effectively by Israeli government leaders and representatives and former leaders. They say, well, why are you asking me about roof knocking? Why are you asking me about humanitarian corridors? Why are you asking me about hospitals? Did you see what they did to us on October 7th? And because they're advancing the narrative of Palestinian brutality and barbarity, then the world community goes, oh, well, you did that. We can't get mad if anything happens to you. And I would argue, and international law certainly supports the idea that even if the worst things imaginable happened, you still have to follow the law. You still have to follow the rules of war. You still have to follow the conventions. But we also know that many of the things that Israel claimed has happened have also not been substantiated. So it's on multiple levels troublesome.
Yeah.